this planet is the only one that we can live on. Perfect for us because we evolved on it. So it is the best place in the universe by far to be a human. How many civilizations are there in a galaxy like the Milky Way? So there's a lot of places where life could begin and evolve. But on this planet, it took 4 billion years roughly to go from the origin of life to us. And 4 billion years is a third of the age of the universe.
What are your thoughts on life after death? Professor Brian Cox, lovely to see you.
Good to be here.
Last time I interviewed you was actually on Radio 2, and I think I had all of about 8 minutes to talk to you, which is an impossible task.
About the universe.
About the universe. Tell me what the universe means in 8 minutes. Yeah. But today we can take our sweet time, so it's really great to see you. Yeah. You are next year embarking on a whole massive world tour for quite literally like 12 months. You're off.
Well, more than that, actually.
Really?
The last one in the end went on for about 4 years.
Oh my God,
so
you're like Coldplay.
You just you just keep adding on to it. Actually, the Boston Globe said that my tour was the Taylor Swift eras of science.
Yes.
And I thought, I'll take that.
Yeah, put that on your
the
poster.
Taylor Swift. It is. I think it is on the poster. You're absolutely right.
I love it.
So, so this one at the moment is about 18 months, I think.
Wow.
Long. And here in the UK, the big shows are in October and November next year. So they're, the O2 and the arenas in Manchester and Birmingham, Nottingham, Liverpool, like all that.
So amazing.
And it's wonderful that it's basically cosmology, it's astronomy and cosmology, but it's kind of like prog rock as well in the sense, because we've got the biggest possible screens that you can fit in those places, which is at the moment. So we've got things like the James Webb Space Telescope, which wasn't active last time that I toured. And almost every day you see beautiful images, like ultra high resolution, magnificent images of sort of exploding stars and colliding galaxies, just beautiful stuff. And so putting those on those screens is really exciting to me because the screens are massive, as I said, as big as we can fit into those arenas.
It's so beautiful. I think a lot of the time we just think, oh God, everything's so doom and gloom out there and everyone's feeling rubbish and a bit down. And then you filling venues of that size, like huge arenas, there are so many people out there that want to feel awe and wonder and have big questions to ask. And I think we forget that.
Yeah, I mean, almost everybody, I would say everybody that I meet is interested in the questions that are raised by astronomy and cosmology, but also biology, just science in general. It's how you phrase the questions. Because there are questions, are we alone in the universe is a question that people think about. Even are we alone in the solar system? Are there microbes on Mars? But also these bigger questions about how did the universe begin? Why is there a universe at all? How come there are things like us in the universe, which are just little patterns of atoms that can have a conversation? I mean, there's an observation a few weeks ago from the James Webb Space Telescope of a galaxy from which the light had been traveling for 13.5 billion years to reach us. So the universe is 13.8 billion years old. So you're seeing this thing as it was just after the universe began.
Wow.
And so you can see that. So you say, well, how did the universe go from that, which is these early galaxies, and even before that, just a load of hydrogen and helium, nothing else. How did it go from that to us, which is really part of what the show's about? One of my great heroes, Carl Sagan, said that a physicist is a hydrogen atom's way of learning about hydrogen atoms. And you go, that's what a beautiful way of putting what a human being is. We started off as just a load of hydrogen a couple of minutes after the Big Bang.
Yeah.
And now we're these things.
Yeah.
And that story is quite majestic. So I think everybody's interested in that.
Yeah. And I think we are desperately wanting to land on that because we get so bogged down with the minutiae of our everyday lives and our worries and our idiosyncrasies and the issues that we've got going on that actually when we pull focus and we go, oh my God, like we ask big questions like that. How the hell did we end up in this civilized world with AI and all of these technological advances? I think we want to constantly pull focus, but we get dragged back to the minutiae again and again on a daily basis. Do you think, because this is such a huge part of how you operate in the world, who you are, how you think. Do you think having that greater perspective impacts your happiness levels and helps you to maybe distract from the everyday stresses?
I think it does for several reasons. And one is a bit more abstract, as you said, the perspective. I mean, it is a remarkable thing to be a human being. And we don't know how far you'd have to go out into the universe to find anything remotely as complicated or wonderful as us. It might be beyond our galaxy you'd have to go. So but that's, as you rightly say, it's a very wide perspective, and it's kind of a luxurious thing to be able to think like that when you're busy every day and you've got real things to do. But I also think that it's kind of, so it's almost meditative in a way. So learning about nature, which is what we're talking about, and nature is not just leaves and plants, it's stars and the universe beyond, is kind of quite a diverting and experience, and it's quite a joyful, pleasurable thing to, and ask very simple questions about, for example, why is the grass green is a good question. So you can sit there and look at the grass, and maybe you don't think about it too much. You say, why is it green? And it's green because it does photosynthesis, and so it takes energy from the sun. And you say, why does it do that? And why does it reflect the green light? So we see it as green. And in the end, actually, you will end up going on a journey that takes you back through the whole history of life on Earth. And so suddenly you start asking questions about, how did the plants come to be on the land? And it was 500 million years ago or something like that. And so it's actually, I think it's a joyful, distracting experience, as well as, so it's just like doing a crossword really, or something else, whatever you people do. But it's also has this profound quality that ultimately, by asking those little questions, you end up going on journeys in your mind that span billions of years and billions of light years. And so, I think that, obviously I would recommend it. Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Without doubt. And also I think it forces you to be open-minded, because with science, things change constantly. And although we can land on a theory or land on something that we know to be true, in 100 years, that can all change. So it's really important to remain open-minded.
It's a really important point, that, because there was, in 1955, actually, one of the great physicists, Richard Feynman, wrote an essay called The Value of Science. And so what is the value of this? So it's obvious that we wouldn't have an iPhone, you wouldn't have modern medicine, you wouldn't have all those things, right? That's obvious stuff. But actually, he said what you said, which is it's because you're trying to understand nature, and the amount of knowledge we have is changing all the time. And so the picture we have of how things work and the theories and our understanding changes all the time. You get used to the fact that you're often wrong. So as a scientist, you're almost always wrong, actually. If you're doing a PhD or something like that, you go, I think it works like this, and nature will say no. And you go, okay. But so you learn to be delighted, actually, when your opinion turns out to be incorrect. And that is a skill that I think we can all agree that many people in public life and elsewhere have lost.
Gone.
But of course, if you're not comfortable with uncertainty and comfortable with being on the edge of the known, then you never learn. And Feynman, actually, in this beautiful essay, I strongly recommend it. You can download it from anywhere. It's Richard Feynman, The Value of Science. It's about 4 pages. And he says in there that even if you think about what democracy is the admission fundamentally that you don't know how to run a country, because you accept that you change the government every 4 or 5 years. And that's a positive thing. So the moment you see someone saying, this is the way to do it, then you know that that is not the right person for the job. They're not actually a Democrat. Because democracy requires you to think that you're flawed and your understanding improves and you get most things wrong, but sometimes you get something right. And that's how we make progress. Yeah. And that's what science is. So there would be no modern medicine without that process.
You need to almost be egoless, because I think, ego is the thing that is, if we look at all the biggest problems in the world right now, it's because of everything you just said, that people are so certain this is how the world should run, this is who should be in power, this is who should control this part of the world. And that's why we're seeing so much conflict and divisiveness and these huge canyon between different people's sets of ideas. And actually, we need more uncertainty to create a level of peace, which is maybe sort of a bit of a general sweeping statement, but it seems like uncertainty is so undervalued.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that Feynman also, he worked on the atom bomb. He worked on the Manhattan Project. So it's not surprising that in the 50s, he was thinking about this stuff because he thought he'd delivered the power to destroy ourselves. He had delivered us the power to destroy ourselves. And the other, more famously, Robert Oppenheimer. So everybody knows Oppenheimer, especially because of the brilliant film recently. So Oppenheimer wrote about the same things in the 50s. And again, he was writing about this idea that you have to embrace doubt and not fear doubt, but embrace it. And also, actually, Oppenheimer, he gave the BBC Wreath lectures, really famous lectures in the 50s. I think it was 53. And he spoke about this stuff. And he said, there's a wonderful thing I remember where he said that everyone, to be a person of integrity, to a thoughtful person, you'll have an anchor. So you'll have beliefs and you'll have a framework and a moral framework, and you'll believe things. And that's really important. To be a person of substance, you have to have a position. But the key is to realize other people have different anchors. And so we all have our different anchors. And the challenge on this planet is to make sure that we work together in the interests of the planet as a whole and the civilization. And that sounds like a bit hippie maybe and whatever. But actually, if you think about it, if you're the person who built the atom bomb and you saw 2 of them dropped on Japan, and so you know what the power of those weapons is, one of the things you might think about is how to not do that.
Yeah.
And they're worth reading, these people, because I think in some ways we've forgotten it.
Well, we massively have. I mean, I had this episode of the podcast quite a few years ago now, but it's one that I always come back to. We had this amazing, he's sadly late ex-Buddhist monk. He had sort of finished his monastic lifestyle and was living in Sweden. And he wrote a book called I May Be Wrong. And that was the mantra constantly, was in any conversation or conflict to have that in the back of his mind, I may be wrong, which immediately sort of like takes the heat and the anger out of certain situations. And it's really interesting because in the lead up to this talk, I listened to a bunch of podcasts where you've been the guest just to see, because obviously your subject matters are widely spanning and you could go on any different path of conversation. So it's really interesting hearing you talk. But one common theme was that you use the word argue a lot, but in a way that we don't normally use it. I think, if you were just to say, I was arguing with, or I argue in an everyday setting, you imagine it's kind of heated and people are pissed off and they're butting heads. But actually, within the context of science, you use it in a much gentler way, perhaps in like the truest way that it should be spoken, that you're bringing another idea to the forefront of the conversation. Yeah,
I didn't know that I used that word a lot, so thank you for that analysis. But yeah, it's right. In the context of science, you make an argument, I think in other disciplines as well, you talk about making an argument, not having an argument, but making one, which is laying out a position.
Yeah.
And that's what science is. What is a theory, a scientific theory? It's basically a guess. So you guess. Einstein guessed about the nature of gravity in 1915. And it looks like he was pretty close and that theory ended up suggesting there may be an origin to the universe. So it's quite a good guess there. But we still don't think it's complete and completely right. So that's the process. So you make a guess and then you'd make an argument, and then in that sense, and then you'd test it. And so you do some experiments and you'd see. And really, what you're doing is not looking for confirmation of your guess. You're looking for the thing where it's frayed, where it starts to not give the right answer, because there's the place to go next to learn some more. And you're right. What you said earlier, it was interesting about ego, because I think if you really are, if you're a scientist and you really are a good scientist, what you're interested in is finding out how nature works. You're not interested in being seen to be right.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, I think. And of course, I'm not naive enough, and I'm not suggesting that scientists don't have egos, because they do. There's all sorts of politics now. I mean, the Nobel Prizes were awarded today. Everyone wants a Nobel Prize and people feel really good about it. But ultimately, most scientists I've met are pure in the sense they just want to find out how things work.
Yeah. And also, curiosity is such a brilliant, again, underrated quality because you can never be bored. There's no chance of being bored if you're relentlessly curious about things. And that's probably something we all have as children. We're curious about the world around us. And then it sort of gets beaten out of us a bit and we kind of stop wondering and stop thinking. And that's why, I guess, again, your shows are so popular because people are naturally deeply curious.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it reminds me of this. One of my heroes is Carl Sagan. And so he did a great series called Cosmos when I was growing up. But he wrote a book called The Demon Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. And I strongly recommend it. And a beautiful book. But right at the start, he tells this story of getting in a taxi in New York. And the taxi driver was like, "You're the astronomer off TV, aren't you?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so he said, "What about aliens? Do you think UFOs have landed?" And so Sagan said, "No, I don't." He said, "Well, what about Atlantis? Do you think there used to be a city under the sea?" And Sagan said, "No," and whatever. "And what about horoscopes and things?" And no. But Sagan, he was really wise, I think, because he said he didn't think he is a person who's just asking silly questions. He thought he is a curious person who's really interested. And really, he just hasn't been served well by society, by education, because there are answers to some of these questions. And the real universe is infinitely more wonderful than imagined civilizations beneath the waves and things. It's far more interesting than that. But he hadn't had access to the information. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that you said at the start, I think there aren't silly questions. There are just people being curious.
Yeah.
And if they don't know the answer, how did the universe begin is a very good question. And actually, we don't know. We don't even know it had a beginning, right? We know it was very hot and dense 13.8 billion years ago, but we don't know what happened before that, if there was a before. And so I think that it's really important to, as you said, the curiosity is the important bit. And then it comes down to, it's part of the responsibility of a society to give people the tools to satisfy their curiosity and investigate their questions.
Yeah, I think people are nervous to ask questions because we hate feeling like we're a bit stupid. We hate thinking, is that such a basic question? Or I think the thing we hate the most is saying, I don't know. Even if someone goes over, have you read that book? And you're like, yeah. And you're lying. Like you don't want to admit that you don't have that knowledge. And actually, I think, again, science seems to be constantly humbling because although we know a hell of a lot, we know there's like so much we don't know. So much we don't know.
I'll get it slightly wrong. There's a great scientist called John Wheeler, who's one of the most famous physicists of the 20th century. And he said that we live on this little island of knowledge surrounded by an ocean of ignorance. But as the size of our island of knowledge increases, so do the shores of our ignorance, which was brilliant. It's a lovely way of putting it.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, the live show that I'm doing now, it starts with a story about a scientist called Johannes Kepler. So Kepler was working in the early 1600s, and he's famous for the laws of planetary motion. So in a way that I cannot conceive how he did it, just from watching the planets like Mars and Jupiter and Saturn, which was some other astronomers had catalogued where they are in the sky, which we've known for thousands of years. It's astrology, right? Where the planets are against the stars. So he took that data and figured out that planets go in ellipses around the sun, and he figured out a relationship between how long their year is and how far away from the sun they are. It's remarkable just from this data. But he was really clever. And in 1609, there's a beautiful story that he wrote about where he was walking across the Charles Bridge in Prague in a snowstorm. And it was snowing, and it was New Year's Eve, as he tells it. And he was going to his benefactor's house to a party. So he was going over the New Year's Eve party to the guy that pays him. And he realised he hadn't brought him a present. And so you noticed the snowflakes landed on his arm. And he looked at them and he said, "Why are they all six-sided?" Right? They're all different and really beautiful, but they're all six-sided. So what is it about that? So he wrote this book going, why? And he said, well, they come from water. So maybe there's something in the water. Maybe it's what the water's made of that makes the snowflake, which is right. He didn't know. It was 1600.
Yeah.
And maybe so something to do with that. Maybe he didn't know about molecules, but he makes all this progress, and he talks about beehives and pomegranate seeds and everything that's got these geometric shapes, and he's on the right track.
Yeah.
We now know it's the water molecule, and we know about that. But it's a 20th century discovery. But right at the end, after he's written this wonderful book, which you can just buy, I recommend it. It's called The Six-Cornered Snowflake.
We need like a whole book list
It's
off
so
this
beautiful.
episode in the notes.
Yeah, The Six-Cornered Snowflake.
Okay.
Right at the end, he just says, I can't go any further with what I know. And he says, I leave it to you, dear reader.
Wow.
To the people of the future. And he says in the translation I have, he says, I'm knocking on the doors of chemistry.
Wow.
But we didn't have chemistry. We didn't know anything. But you see this brilliant mind asking all these questions and then almost being happy at the end, going, it's great. It's something for the people of the future.
I think also, because I watched the trailer for your show and heard that story, and I was again sort of bowled over by the simplicity of a question that, that many of us probably haven't wondered. Why does a snowflake look like that?
Yeah.
And actually, our appreciation for the natural world and the fact that we know we're not really looking after it probably does boil down to the fact that we've lost that sort of simple curiosity about why a snowflake has 6 sides. We sort of don't give a shit. We're like, oh, well, how, can we go to space? And I know we'll get onto that, but, we've lost that sort of simplicity, that curiosity about the real simple aspects of the natural world around us.
Yeah, and this is one of the greatest minds, I would say, the Kepler. I mean, he was a genius. But you're right, he's asking this really childlike question, which is a very deep question.
Yeah.
And actually, someone wrote recently, it was a Nobel Prize winner, I've forgotten who it was, but he was asked, like, what if you were to go to kids to school and say everything's made of atoms, things are made of atoms, is there anything you can do as an experiment in a school to show that? It's very difficult. This is a 20th century discovery. Yeah. And he said it's probably the shapes of things like snowflakes. Because if you see something, and Kepler said, I cannot believe that this beautiful shape exists at random.
Yeah.
There's a reason why this thing is like that. And the reason is the water molecule. And you have to know quantum mechanics and all sorts of things to understand why the water molecule is the way that it is.
Yeah.
But that idea that crystals, crystal structure like a snowflake, is telling you something about a deeper picture is a really modern way of looking at it. And it's right, it's correct. So it's probably snowflakes. Snowflakes are probably the example of something that's telling you there's something else going on.
How does that play into just like our human lives? Do you personally believe that life is a random string of events that happen, or is there some sort of destiny, fate, preordained something about how we're living as humans?
No, I think it's a random series of events.
We are not snowflakes.
Well, the snowflake. So it's the snowflake. So they're all 6-sided, but then you say, well, why are they all different then? Which Kepler also noticed. They're all different, but they're all kind of similar. They're all different because they have different formation histories. So it's the path they take through the clouds when they form that gives them their shape. That's true of a human.
Yeah.
That's true of us.
Yes, very much so.
So we're shaped by the path we take through life.
Oh, I like that.
So in that sense, we are the same as snowflakes. We're a frozen history in a way, which is what a snowflake is. But in terms of the thing about destiny, so it has a name in science. It's called teleology, which is the idea that there's a final, the cause is in the future. So you're evolving towards something.
Yeah.
You're going toward, and that's not the way that we think of the universe scientifically. So evolution, for example, like why are we the way that we are? It's all about our evolutionary history. We're not evolving to become smarter or something like that. You evolve to fit your environment, but it's not that that we're not some kind of ascent to some grander sort of form. So that's not the way that we think in science.
Well, because I guess also if you look at the human race, we are undoubtedly getting smarter, but in some ways getting so much more stupid.
I'm not sure if we're getting smarter. I mean, when you look at even recently people like Kepler, if you read that book, you see a modern mind, a very, very clever person. So I don't think we've got smarter in the last few hundred years. In fact, in the past few thousand years, no one's got smarter. The really interesting question is what happened to civilization and society that allowed us in about 1600 to suddenly start basically doing science, which has led to the modern world. Because if you think about it, without being dismissive to everyone who lived before that, we didn't make much progress, right? If you went to
walking
ancient
around
Egypt,
with horses.
yeah, if someone from ancient Greece went back 2,000 years to ancient Egypt, they wouldn't really notice a lot different.
Yeah.
But they'd, it'd be a bit different. They'd have pyramids rather than temples.
Yeah.
But it'd basically, the knowledge they had about the world hadn't changed. So it didn't change ever, basically, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And then around 1500, 1600, suddenly we start accumulating knowledge. And in only 400 years from Kepler, thinking about these points of light, we've visited them all. 400 years. We've been to every planet that Kepler saw and discovered some that he didn't know about. And now we have a spacecraft, the Voyager 1, it's 50 years since it was launched. It's on the edge of the solar system. It's on the way to the stars. And that happened in 400 years. Yeah. So I find it really interesting that it's not people have got smarter, it's that our society got smarter.
And how important is space travel in terms of our longevity as a human race? Is it essential?
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, you could say, well, it's going to be essential eventually, but it's essential now, actually. So if you look at the way our civilization works, a large amount of the things we take for granted are delivered from space. So there's a number. I think there was a report from the Royal Society, which is the UK's oldest scientific society, about a year ago. And I think the number is 16% of UK GDP requires space-based infrastructure. Yeah. It's a very big number. And because if you think about it, we use it for all our communications. We use it for the timing of our computer networks, financial transactions, weather forecasting, understanding climate and all that kind. So the list goes on and on and on.
Also how they're making certain medicines kind of essential that they're...
In the future, yeah. So already we're talking about that there's experiments to manufacture drugs and medicines, as you say, on the space station. Some things are better manufactured in zero G and so on. So, but even now, it's so integrated with our society that if we lost that infrastructure, it would literally, the civilization would grind to a halt. Yeah. So we're already completely entwined with it. And I think, so we make a mistake when we think of space as science fiction. It's really not. It's part of, I did a discussion with someone the other day. I was going to say argument, but it was a discussion and they said, you shouldn't think of we talk about the space economy, which is growing. And we're thinking about things like mining asteroids and putting power stations in space and so on. And then the Earth economy. But they said, no, it's just the economy. It's all the same. We're expanding outwards. Yeah. We're already near Earth orbit is completely entwined with everything that we do. So it's becoming very important, actually, to manage it as well and to regulate it, to make sure it's not the Wild West up there, because it's essential to all our lives. Yeah, well, exactly. And I guess also like looking at how, meddling with asteroids, for instance, putting power stations on certain other planets is going to impact everything. It's going to impact... asteroids. So there's the resources. There's an argument which a lot of the people, the early sort of evangelists for space, there's a guy called Gerard O'Neill, later a guy called Robert Zubrin, who influenced Elon Musk quite heavily. And they all had this view that we're putting too much pressure on the planet, obviously, which I think everyone agrees upon, about resource extraction and so on. But the thing is that there are resources, an infinite amount of resources up there above our heads, if we can access them. And a lot of the early sort of pioneers and thinkers felt that would relieve the pressure on Earth. And it would, in principle, if you can do it. It relieve the pressure on Earth because you're not fighting over resources on Earth. Yeah. You've realised that you can just go to that asteroid, the moon, Mars, and so on. And it often sounds like, as I said before, it sounds like science fiction and naive. And it maybe was in the 70s, maybe it was rather sort of wishful thinking, but it sort of isn't now.
Yeah.
It's coming. And so I think there are great benefits to be had from moving into space. And it gets a bad name sometimes because, we all know about the controversies around some of the people who go there and space tourism and all those things, which would be fun. I'd quite like to do it, but obviously it's whatever. But actually, the real potential there is to allow us to expand as a civilization without damaging the planet.
Yeah.
That's the potential.
It seems like it needs to rally alongside us actually just taking care of the planet as well. Because I think, yes, absolutely, we can see how that could be the future of us and not annihilating the planet that we're living on. But equally, will that make people even more apathetic? Like, we don't need to worry about Earth because we can just go up there and go to an asteroid and nick something off of that.
And that's definitely not true.
No.
So the thing to say, and this always has to be said, you're right, at the same time as talking about the potential of space, is that this planet is the only one that we can live on in large numbers in the way that we do. It's perfect for us because we evolved on it. So it is the best place in the universe by far to be a human.
Yeah.
And that's just a statement of fact. That's the way that it is. So yes, we can build colonies on Mars and the moon first, probably. And there'll be a few hundred people or maybe a few thousand people, but it'll be horrible. It's not a nice place, Mars, and it never will be a nice place.
No.
You might have some nice greenhouses and some big sort of buildings, but imagine living your life confined to a building. There are not going to be rivers on the surface of Mars anytime soon.
No.
If at all, even if you can terraform the planet in hundreds of years' time, it's just not nice. So we have to remember that as a human being, this is the best planet in the universe because we evolved on it. And there will not be a replacement.
No, I mean, you started a global sort of summit with all of the world leaders giving this quite punchy statement that, like, this is it. And you were saying, even they were kind of perhaps assuming that you would turn up and go, like, have a great time chatting about leadership, guys. And actually, you delivered some extremely punchy facts that they needed to hear.
What I said to them was that, so we could ask the question, how many civilizations are there in a galaxy like the Milky Way, or specifically in the Milky Way galaxy? And the answer is we don't know. So it's a big galaxy, 400 billion stars. Most of them have planets, so there'll be trillions of planets. There's an estimate that there might be over 10 billion potentially Earth-like worlds in the Milky Way galaxy. So there's a lot of places where life could begin and evolve. But on this planet, it took 4 billion years, roughly, to go from the origin of life to us. And 4 billion years is a third of the age of the universe. And so many people I speak to make the argument that that might be unusual. It might be microbes on Mars and all over the place. But if that's what it usually takes, which is what it took here, to get things like us, there's probably very few planets which have been stable enough to allow life to live on them for 4 billion years. So what I said at that climate summit was to the world leaders was, let's imagine that we're the only civilization in the Milky Way galaxy. Just a working hypothesis. Might not be, but might be. So let's imagine that we are. And let's imagine that you, being the leaders, through deliberate action, which would be something like nuclear war, or inaction, like, failing to address the climate crisis or whatever it is, you cause this civilization to be damaged or even removed from the Earth. If you do that, then each of you may be personally responsible for destroying meaning in a galaxy of 400 billion suns, potentially forever. Have a nice meeting, was my
it's
message
the best
to
intro
them,
ever.
which is true. The thing is, I think we don't know if it's correct, that, but it's possible.
Yeah.
So I think it's just let's work on the basis.
Does that terrify
that there's
you?
nobody else.
That terrifies me, that thought.
It sort of does. There's a very famous quote by Arthur C. Clarke, the guy who wrote 2001, amongst many other things, who said that either we are alone in the universe or we're not. And both of those are terrifying.
Yeah.
So choose the one that terrifies you the most. I mean, I agree with you. I wish I could talk about it, but I can't because I went to a film set, and I won't even say when it was because you'll never. Well, anyway, but it was a science fiction film, and and I signed an NDA and everything, so I can't talk. But it was I was talking to the actor. He was a very famous actor about, and it was a scene that he was playing when he saw some aliens for the first time, or saw his alien spaceship, and it was before he did it, and he said to me, "What would you kind of feel what would be your reaction if you saw it?" And I know that you've interviewed actors, right? You know what they do. They watch you and they ask you questions and then they nick things. Cillian Murphy, as an aside, Cillian Murphy. I worked on a film called Sunshine years ago with Danny Boyle and Alex Garland wrote it. Cillian was to play the physicist. And we spent a lot of time together on that film. And I took him to CERN, right, where I worked at the time. And we had a great fun and went out for a few drinks and got to know each other. In the film, he does this thing where he's sending a message back to Earth. And he knows they're going to the sun, and he knows that his family won't receive it. He'll never see them again, really. And he does this thing like that with his and he's kind of nervous, and he does this thing. And I said to him, "Why'd you do that?" And he said, "Because you do it." So he said, when I ask you difficult questions deliberately, then if it's a personal thing and you're not really comfortable, you do this thing.
I love it.
And so he does it.
He nicked it.
Basically, yeah.
That's
and he
so
said
good.
we did a thing recently, and he said, yeah, I just did an impression of
That's
Brian.
so great.
So this actor had said, yeah, what would you think if you saw the aliens? They landed like outside here. Now, what do you think? And I said, I'd just be relieved.
Yeah.
And he was like really confused. He was like, but you're scared of it. No, because the responsibility, I'd feel the weight of being the only repository of meaning in a galaxy of 400 billion suns lifted off my shoulders.
Yeah.
And then he looked so confused. I thought, I wonder if I've ruined this scene. Because I remember if he's like, going, I know what I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I'd be terrified.
And then he's like, yeah, and then he's like, what was he going to do? Is he going to look relieved when he sees this thing, which wouldn't kind of work? And so, yeah.
I mean, that is the terrifying bit, I think, is the lack of meaning, isn't it? Because yes, there's the lack of life, but the lack of meaning, which is only cultivated via the human brain.
That's that's my position. I think that, I mean, you could, argue if you're religious, you would not say that, right? But I think that as far as we can tell, meaning is a property of consciousness. It comes from consciousness. It comes from thinking. And thinking is something that we do, and we're physical structures. So it's something that emerges from a very complex physical system, the most complex thing we know of anywhere in the universe, which is the human brain. So my argument is that if there are no structures as complex as human brains on any of these other planets in the Milky Way galaxy, then there's likely no meaning there. So it means meaning. I have a friend who was the Dean of Guildford Cathedral, a wonderful man called Victor Stock, who's great. And I had loads of conversations with him. And in the end, we figured out that the only thing we disagreed on was that he thinks meaning is eternal and universal, right? Because he believes in God.
Energy?
Right? Well, he believes in God, right?
Okay,
he ran a cathedral, right? So whereas I think it's local and temporary.
Right.
So I think it comes from us. It's a property of things like us. And I think that it's sort of weird to say that because it's a scientific way of looking at the world, right? It's just there's nothing. That's what it is. But it kind of puts us back at the center of the universe in some strange sense, or elevates us, I think. It makes us very valuable because of the rarity of structures like us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, science has we've spent the last 400 years demoting ourselves from the center of the universe physically and finding that we're physically insignificant. But I also think we've got more and more knowledge about what a remarkable and probably rare thing a human being is.
I mean, you say when you open shows, often you'll say, what does it mean to live a finite life in an infinite universe? And I wonder what your personal reaction to that question is, because for me, it feels extremely motivating. Like, oh my God, I mean, it is quick. It's ephemeral. I need to get a move on. I need to experience life and live it to the max. But I think equally it could make you feel quite nihilistic and go, what's the fucking point in anything?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are two reactions to it. But I think, if you're walking through some forest and you just tread on an orchid, let's say a rare orchid is there, and it's just there, and it's just one thing, you tread on it. What's your reaction to that? Is it to say, oh, it doesn't matter, it was going to be gone tomorrow anyway, it's a rare thing, they don't last very long? Or do you think that there's something of immense beauty that should be protected because of the ephemeral nature of its existence?
Yes.
I once visited Frank Drake, actually. So there's a thing called the Drake equation that is very famous. It was Frank Drake in the 50s and 60s, was one of the founders of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And so he had a thing which, can we try and work out how many civilizations there might be in a galaxy? But I went to meet him quite late in his life. He died a few years ago, but it was wonderful at his house. And he collects orchids. And there was an orchid there that we'd arrived, and it blooms for one day a year.
Wow.
This thing. And it was just happened to be on the day that we arrived. And he said, this obviously makes it more beautiful. No one could argue that this one that blooms on one day a year is less beautiful than the one that's just always there, right? It's a beautiful thing. So we all understand that. But he said, actually, that maybe that's what civilizations are like. So maybe the fact that we haven't seen anyone or heard anyone is just because they're like these little orchids that just flower and then disappear.
Yeah.
But that would make them more beautiful to me.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. And that's
what we are.
Yeah.
We're just things. If we're kind of immortal, that's the thing in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that Douglas Adams wrote, where someone got made accidentally immortal.
Yeah.
And life was so pointless that they went around the galaxy insulting everybody in alphabetical order.
So good.
Not even per planet, but in alphabetical order.
So good.
Maybe that's the only thing that would be left if you're immortal.
Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on life after death? Because, again, I'm going to quote you, and I've got to try and find, I've got a whole list of quotes here, but you say life is a conduit through which energy in the universe passes. So say a human, an animal, a plant dies, where is that energy going?
Yeah, I mean, it's what is life? I mean, that's a very good question, by the way. The answer is we don't really know. That there are two very famous books on the reading list.
The reading list is immense.
One is called What is Life by Erwin Schrödinger, which was a very famous book in the 40s that sort of predicted the existence of DNA, which was discovered later. A great friend of mine, actually, Sir Paul Nurse, who's got a Nobel Prize, who runs the Francis Crick Institute here, or founded it in London. He wrote a book recently called What is Life, which is brilliant, from a Nobel Prize winning biologist. And he ultimately says that we don't really know, but you can pin some things down. So one, as you said, is it's something that happens. It's that there's energy, a flow. By energy, I mean, what do? We burn food in oxygen. And if we stop burning food in oxygen, then we die. So there's an energy in the way a steam engine does things. So there's that part of it. And then there's information. It processes information as well. So that's what we do. So there's an information component and an energy component. But the point is, it just at a fundamental level, it's no different to something like a computing device, in the sense that it obeys these basic physical laws, which are, there's got to be a source of energy, and you've got to be able to do things, and your structure remains and things like that. So that would imply that it's the same as if your iPhone will stop processing information if you take the battery out. Yeah. So it's dead. It's a dead iPhone then. Admittedly, you can bring it back to life, so it's probably not a good analogy because you can recharge it,
we are
which we
to
can't do
currently.
So, but you get the idea is that and this was all the way back in Schrödinger's book. He said this in the 40s. Life obeys the laws of physics, so it is part of the physical universe, and so therefore you don't have any. There's no conceivable way that your conscious experience can persist when the machine stops working. So, and that might sound harsh, but I would flip it round as we did before and say, isn't it remarkable that there's this kind of thing? It's just obeying the laws of physics, and the laws of physics are pretty simple. Yeah, there are only 4 forces of nature that we know of. And it all started out as hydrogen and helium 13.8 billion years ago. And we've managed to get into these patterns that can genuinely, I really mean it, bring meaning to the universe.
Yeah.
So,
do you find that, again, personally enables you to look at your reactions to, I'm talking about everyday stuff here, nothing particularly traumatic or extra stressful, but like the everyday, either mundanity or maybe it could be the bombardment of like outside news we're receiving daily or stuff you've got going on in the family home. Can you look at everything through the lens of science and go, I'm reacting to this because of, my history and the data and whatever? Can you apply it to your own life in that way?
Well, no, obviously. I just get pissed off. But I think there is something to be said. Like you mentioned data. So it's quite liberating if you say, like let's say you don't like flying, for example. So some people don't like flying and you get nervous. But you can actually go and look at the data and find out that it's safe compared to other modes of transport.
Yeah.
So you could just say, okay, I'm not going to be scared of flying then.
Yeah.
If you really can trust the data. So it is useful to look at facts are useful.
I agree.
Data is useful. I know it's difficult, and I know that we all have different, sort of things that worry us for different reasons, and that's part of being human. But you can kind of liberate yourself a bit from it.
I agree. I think I don't deal with it so much now, but I had like really bad OCD at one point, and you have to apply logic and fact to it because it's so illogical. It's so like fantastical and over the top and enlarged at times that you need to have, whether it's like photo evidence, fact, data that you've done this thing before, it's nothing bad's going to happen.
Yeah. And
treat yourself like a machine, like a computer.
Yeah, because you are basically. It's a good question. I did talking about the Crick Institute. There's a podcast. I'm not promoting that, but I'll promote it anyway. We're like a very friendly
podcast. We'll promote other ones.
We did the podcast called A Question of Science, and I love it actually. And it's out at the moment. They're coming out once a week, and it's just at the Crick Institute, and it's just experts on a panel, and I chair it. And the audience asks questions. So it's like question time, but with people who know what they're talking about, basically, is the difference.
Yeah.
And so we did one for example, can we cure cancer? Because it's mainly, a lot of the Crick Institute is cancer research. And it was a tremendously optimistic program, actually, because you realize how rapid the progress is in understanding this disease, and just looking at the statistics, as you said earlier, the survival rates. Anyway, so we did cancer, aging, dementia, those things. But also we did one on AI, which was really interesting to me because the question is, is there any difference between us and a computer, let's say? So could you imagine they call it AGI, artificial general intelligence that's like us, rather than just a thing that does one thing at a time, which is what we have now. And there was some debate, actually, and the more neuroscience-y people felt, no, that it's really very difficult, that the human brain is much, not that there's anything mystical going on, but it's so complicated, and it's all to do with our experience of the world. It's connected to our bodies. So you can't have a brain in a jar, thing that you could just imagine just taking your brain out and putting it in a thing and just leave it. But yeah, so it's like... So I think the jury's still out on whether we now in our conversation, whether we could be having this in a big computer, right? It's kind of are we living in a simulation kind of question.
Yeah.
And I think the jury seems to be still out amongst the experts on that, or whether biology is really difficult to simulate.
Our brains are not that different to space in terms of the fact that there's so little we know still. There's so much more to be learned about how it works.
It's amazing. I'll probably get it wrong now, but someone was telling me at the Crick about some work they've done on mice, and they're looking at how they smell, the olfactory sort of system. And they had these sort of, they just begin to see that there's little co-processors in the brain. So a smell will come in, and this thing will kind of take that data, which is just it's the same data that comes from your eyes or your ears, right? They're all just neurons going in there. So your brain sort of figures out, what is it? It's a smell thing. It's not a sight thing. And then what is it? And then what would that do? Where is it? So it sends some data to a spatial bit of the brain that is dealing with where it is and how far away it is. And then another bit to, is it something you should not like, or like a reflex sort of thing? Or is it something that you use to build your model of the world? So is it telling you there's a forest around the corner or something like that? And it's so remarkable that they're just beginning to map out which bits of the brain do this and how they get the data and where they distribute it to. Yeah. And it was amazing to me because you're right, we know a lot about it, but we don't know as much as we would like to know about it. No. It's like the universe, as you said, in that sense.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me. And we're living amongst, there's been bad, poor mental health forever, but it seems like, and that's the sort of thing that I'm deeply interested in, is people's mental health and how we can help ourselves better it. And we're still yet to crack that one because we're up Schitt's Creek with that one at the moment.
Yeah. I think it all comes back to what we were talking about earlier, that we've not figured out how to run a world, definitely. And we've sort of figured out how to run societies, but maybe we're not doing a very good job at the moment.
No.
And I would guess it's something to do with the rate of change and I suppose social media and things have fed into that, and we're having to live in a different way and interact with people in a different way, and we've not adapted to it. But I think it's the number one challenge that we face, for all the reasons we've spoken about, how valuable this society is. But one of the possible explanations for why we don't see any other civilizations out there is because they don't get very far. So if you think about us at the moment, it's only in the last century, half a century, that we've had the power to destroy ourselves.
Yeah.
And we've managed to avoid it. It's remarkable, probably, that for 70 years or so since the invention of the atomic bomb, we haven't used them again.
Yeah.
After we used the 200 pound.
Yeah.
But we might do. And maybe there's a theory that essentially says it's too difficult to manage a planet. So when you have so many billion living things, people in this case on the planet, you just can't get along. No. There's too many.
Yeah.
So I would hate that to be the case because I think that we're so valuable and so rare.
Yeah.
But we don't really, the progress we've made seems to be unraveling somewhat at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, as we are running out of time really quickly, there's so many different
tangents.
What do you mean,
literally running out of time?
We are like, the world's
the whole
end.
civilization.
Yeah. But I think one burning question I have, and this is more from talking to my kids. So my son, who is 12, is bang into science. Like, it's his whole world. He loves it. And I'm constantly trying to learn from him and go back to the drawing board with my lack of scientific knowledge. And my daughter, who's 10, I spoke to her in the car yesterday about this chat today, and what would you ask Professor Brian Cox? And it was all around aliens, obviously. But there seems to be a point in the education system where girls are, whether it's discouraged or feel like they don't have so much of a place in the science world. And we can see that reflected throughout history with the few scientific women that are, historically held up and shown as an example of someone that's done. I can think of Marie Curie, and then I'm sort of out of ideas. How can we encourage women to get more into science, or for young? I think this starts at the school, doesn't it? How can we really focus on that and ensure that we're creating space and room for young women to really find their place in this conversation?
I think, as you said, we have to, and this applies to all fields actually, you have to, when a child shows interest in something, you've got to really make sure that you don't snuff out that curiosity, that you encourage it. And also, you're right that there's, what could it be that's preventing girls going into science? That is quite complicated. And the only bit I know is I was involved a few years ago now in a prize, the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering, which looked at this, because engineering, there's an equal problem, if not a larger problem. And one of the things that was found is that there are unconscious biases from parents. If you think of engineering, your view of what engineering is might be building a road with a hard hat on, Now, that's actually quite high tech now and really interesting. But you might think, I don't want my daughter digging up roads, with all these big blokes or something. So you have preconceptions.
Yeah.
And so in engineering, that is the case. And so then, and it wouldn't be that, it's very rare that parents would try and put their daughter off for going into something. But your reaction might not be quite as encouraging as it should be, because you might be on. And so science maybe has that image that maybe, like being a rocket engineer, for example. And we have a shortage of spacecraft builders in the UK. We're very good at it. It's one of our great industries that we're world leading in. And we don't have enough people going into the industry.
Wow.
So it could be that if your daughter, you say which rocket building, you might have this unconscious image of a load of geeky blokes in a room, playing with computers or something. So that we have to make sure that teachers and parents don't transfer any lack of understanding of the career to their daughters in this case. But it applies to sons as well. We try and let them do what they want to do and encourage them whichever way that they want to go.
Yeah.
And then you're right. And then you get into more complicated issues about career structures, which many industries have that. And that's true in academia as well, and people try to do that. So yeah, it's a very good question.
Yeah.
But in terms of real youngsters, I really believe that it's making sure that if your daughter says, I'm interested in astronomy, you go, right.
Yeah.
So you take them outside and you start to know what the stars are. If you buy them some binoculars maybe, and which you can get, and you can you encourage it. I think it's all about encouragement, and not putting barriers in the way. The one thing I would say also is that it's really important as parents that you can. Let's say you haven't been to university. Let's say university. You haven't been to university, and your son or daughter says, "I'd like to do that." Then you can go to the universities as a parent and you can find out what it's like, because you might not know people who've been to university, and that's one of the big blocks actually. And so the universities are really happy if you say, what would happen to my child if they came to, where would they stay? Where would they live? Because you might be anxious about that, and you can transfer that to your child as well. But all the universities and higher education colleges, all this, are really happy if you come and say, I don't understand this myself. Can you show me? And then you can provide encouragement, and you can begin to remove the blocks that might be there.
Yeah, I think there's just some brilliant young women out there who are ready to change the world, and it's exciting.
There are, you said about the scientists. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is, how do we know how far away the stars are? I got asked that in a school the other week. How do we know how far away the stars are? One of the most important measurements, it was a great astronomer called Henrietta Leavitt, who was the first to work out that there are some stars, they call Cepheid variable stars, but it allows you to work out how bright they actually are by looking at them. And she noticed that in the early part of the 20th century. That's the foundation. That work was used to prove that the Andromeda galaxy, which is our nearest neighbouring galaxy, is far outside the Milky Way. But it was her work.
Yeah.
So there are actually quite a lot of famous women in the history of astronomy, but also science. But as you said, it's usually Marie Curie.
Yeah.
But there's no, now
I felt embarrassed that I couldn't think of any more earlier. I was like, I'm going to have to ask ChatGPT, because I need to know about more of them. The men you can list off, but the women, they're maybe harder to find. Maybe that's a slight block for young girls too. They're not seeing it in history. Yeah.
But there are increasing numbers now.
Yeah.
Of role models. But you're right. It's just, the history of science. I said that it really did start modern science in 1600.
Yeah.
So those names like Newton and Einstein and, Galileo, they're men. But of course, we're talking about a society in 1600.
Yeah.
So there's part of that, I think, just historically, until you get to the 20th century, it was extremely difficult to be a woman and go into science. It's changing, but as you said, when you say, I was going to say not fast enough, the reason I would say that is because what we need in all sort of areas of human endeavour are people who are good at it and want to push the boundaries. You need talent. And if you're only drawing talent from a small pool, in this case, you should say men, right? You're missing half the potential to advance human knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's there's a practical point to be made as well. You just want to find the best talent.
People. Yeah, exactly. To end things, where is your happy place?
Oh, yeah, that's the title of the podcast, isn't it?
I forgot to ask. So bad.
I
was too busy thinking about space and female scientists. I totally forgot.
I think it is. If you're allowed to, does it have to be a physical place?
No,
Can it be kind of a state of mind?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I think it is trying to understand something that I don't understand. And at some point, figuring it out. I really loved that process.
Is the figuring out essential? Does that lead to frustration if there's not a conclusion of sorts?
I think that if you're trying to understand something that is understood, but someone understands it, but it might be very difficult, then that process of trying to find your own way of internalizing that idea so that it becomes natural to you and you really understand it is a really exhilarating thing to do. And I always say to students, actually, so I teach at the University of Manchester, I teach first years, and I always say to them that these ideas, I talk about relativity, right? Relativity is a bit confusing, quite a lot.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it doesn't matter how long it takes you to get a particular thing into your mind, right, to understand it. And it's different for everybody, and it's different for each different idea. Some ideas someone will get in 10 seconds and go, yeah, I understand that. And sometimes it might take a month for someone else, but it doesn't matter. And I interviewed recently a great Nobel Prize winning mathematician, Sir Roger Penrose, who got the Nobel Prize for, in the 60s, he proved that black holes would form. So this very famous paper in 1963, and he got the Nobel Prize in 2020. And someone asked him, so a young person from the audience said to him, how do you win a Nobel Prize? And he said, I was really slow at school. So, and actually I was so slow that they thought I wasn't very good at maths. Wow. And he's one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th and 21st century. But he's slow. So he understood that really the thing that's really enjoyable is just taking your time and keeping going until you understand something. Then you don't need to do an exam or have anyone test you. You know when you understand something.
Yeah.
And the thing is not to be worried about the fact that it might take you ages.
Well, our culture is like tomorrow, yesterday, like it should have been done. Why are things not moving more quickly? So it's amazing advice in life in general to not be in a rush for any conclusion or any moment. You
can't rush understanding. You can't be in a rush to understand stuff.
No.
You know it when you understand it, you know it.
Yeah, I think that goes for just learning about yourself, doesn't it? You think if I look back to my 30s, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know who the hell I was or what I was doing, and you can't rush that. It's with age and experience. Yeah. Basil, who I work with, said that I should have asked you, where is your happy space instead of place?
Happy space. Yeah. Well,
is there anywhere in space that you love? If you look at the history of the universe, in which point in that history would you like to hang out in?
Now.
Right.
Here. Because I think that all the things that we talked about earlier about the challenges that we face, it is true that there's no better time to be a human being than now. It's obvious in some ways the way, if you go back to when our grandparents were born, there were no antibiotics. They didn't exist when our grandparents were born.
Yeah, it's mad.
It's post Second World War, really, that we have access to antibiotics in any large amount. So really, if you think about it, certainly in a country like this, that we're lucky to live here, there is no better place in history to live. Now it's up to us whether that continues to be the case. It might not. We could have the Third World War, and then it would not be the best place to live. But that's a choice.
Yeah.
That we have to make.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I would rather live in a time where there were antibiotics.
Me too. Me too.